Hey friends, thanks for taking time to listen in on a conversation I had with Arisha Shory and Jennifer Cordeiro. During winter break, I had the opportunity to speak with Arisha and Jennifer, Canadian third-year law students who are passionate about motorsports law and Formula One. As you'll hear, we dive into what it's like to be young Canadian F1 fans navigating both the sport and the legal profession, two traditionally male-dominated fields. Arisha and Jennifer share their firsthand experiences attending Grand Prix at COTA, Monza, and Barcelona, revealing the fascinating differences between North American and European races. We discuss the spectacle versus the sport, how American Express activations dominated COTA, why Las Vegas Grand Prix promotion was everywhere at other races, and the exhausting reality of attending a full race weekend that no one talks about. They also open up about being women in motorsports law, the surprising support they found from professionals, the judgment they face as fans, and where they see the most opportunity for the next generation in this industry. But before we get to our conversation, I need to ask, can you help us out? If this show adds value to your F1 experience, please take a moment to follow us and give us 5 stars on your favorite podcast app. Share this episode with other F1 fans. That's how people find us, and it's how we keep growing this community. Hope you enjoy our conversation. Okay, friends, I am so excited that we're doing this conversation on the record. And I know because you're law students, those 3 words on the record just created a huge fear factor in you, because that's what I've always go through. Like, oh gosh, it's on the record now. People are going to know what I think, what I say. But I think it's fantastic that you both have been willing to sit down and share about your experiences, both as fans of the sport, but then also our mutual area, which is the law. And you are law students, which makes me excited because I really appreciate getting to meet people who are pursuing this field. And I remember what it was like to be a law student and how hard it was. And for me, it was such a journey. And then you're also North Americans. You're not Americans. You're North Americans. You're in Canada. And so I think that that's something I've enjoyed getting to know you both over the past year about the similarities and differences between our systems and our journeys. So welcome to the show, ladies.
Thank you so much. We're very excited. Thanks for having us.
Well, do you want to introduce yourselves?
I'm Jennifer Cordeiro. I'm originally from Toronto, Ontario, but now I'm living in Kamloops, British Columbia, which is a small little city in interior BC. It's beautiful out here, but I am a third-year law student as well, third and final year, which is very exciting. And then I'll be relocating to Calgary, Alberta.
And I am Arisha Shory. I am from Calgary, Alberta. I'm also in my 3rd year of law school here in Kamloops. And after graduation, I'll be going back to Calgary as well.
Okay, so for the non-lawyers, non-law students listening in the audience, they don't understand that being a 3L, the amount of pressure that you have, also in some ways the level of boredom that kind of feels, because the hardest year was the 1L year, but the hardest pressure was the 3L year, because that's when you're having to make different decisions, where you realize how much the time has passed and how much more you still have to get done. So I'm really grateful that you both have made time in the midst of your 3L year to say, hey, let's sit down for a more official conversation, because we have an interesting story of how we met. You both were at the Lawinsport Motorsport Conference in March of 25. It was in London. I also attended that conference, and I think we just were sitting by each other and struck up a conversation, and that's endured now for almost a year of watching your journey of this 3L year. You did an exchange program, and now you're back in Canada. And over the course of the year, we also talked about our mutual love, respect for motorsport, and specifically Formula One. And then I found out that you guys have actually attended a number of races. So I said, I think our audience would love to hear your insights. And that's how we ended up being in this conversation. So I think what would be great is that we kind of unpacked a couple of different topics. We'll see where that goes. And then if we can't cover it all, maybe once school's out or you have more time, we can do a part 2. But let's start with a little bit more about your background in your actual attendance at Grand Prix. You attended COTA in 24 and Monza in 25, both of you. And then Jen, you attended Barcelona in 23. I wanted to know what drew you to attend those specific races.
Barcelona was a family trip, so it just worked out that we were doing a trip with my family to Portugal and Spain. I saw that the race was on. I hadn't been to one yet, but my dad had, and he and I share that love in the sport. And so I suggested it. It worked out, and we got to go, which was awesome. And then for Arisha, your first one was COTA.
Yeah. And I think COTA worked out because, well, Jennifer actually introduced me to the sport in first year of law school. So I didn't grow up with it like she did, but I think safe to say it was love at first sight. She just randomly told me about this sport and she said, they just added this new track in Vegas. Would you want to watch it with me? And I said, sure, why not? You know what? I'll get some house errands and chores done. And I did not move for a single minute while the race was on. And so we ended up going to COTA because with our school schedule and logistics and traveling, that just seemed like the most accessible race. And I know that was also somewhere we both had never been. And so we wanted to make sure we were going somewhere that we'd also had wanted to travel to and explore while attending the Grand Prix.
And what about Barcelona, Jen?
Yeah, Barcelona, I actually didn't get to see much of Barcelona. We truly went for the race, which is different than the other 2 races I've been to. Because with COTA and with Monza, I made a point of seeing those cities. But with Barcelona, we truly flew into Spain for the race. We spent the 3 days at the track all day long. And then we ended up doing like a coastal town, and that was sort of it. I'd have to go back to do Barcelona itself, but truly was there for the race in that instance, which is different than in the past or in the future, I guess.
Yeah. And then I think with Monza, very similar to COTA, Jennifer and I were both actually out in exchange last semester in France, in Europe. And so it again became a logistical question of what was accessible. I mean, at the end of the summer, most of the European circuits are done. And honestly, we're both big Ferrari fans as well. So I felt like it was fitting that we could, with our school schedule, get to Monza. And then also, for my first, at least, European circuit, like experience, like what is like Ferrari's like home race. And so that was really special as well.
Okay, so I also want to step back and talk a little bit about the Lawinsport Motorsport Conference because that was in London. You did say that you were in France for the exchange program, but it's still quite an impressive time commitment for law students to come out and sit for multiple days and the networking. What were you hoping to gain from the experience?
I think we really wanted to get our feet wet, honestly. There aren't as many opportunities in motorsport in Canada and maybe even North America in general. And so getting out to London was really our only opportunity to make those connections. And I think that was our primary goal, was to get out there, learn as much as we possibly could, but also connect with so many incredible people that we wouldn't have had the opportunity had we not made that journey overseas.
Yeah, I think when you're in law school, you're encouraged to try so many areas within the law. And we're very lucky that we have such a supportive school that when we went to them for the London conference and told them what our interest was, professors were excited and our school was able to provide some funding to help us get there. Because one thing about Formula One, whether you're attending the Grand Prix or going to a conference, is it's definitely a financial commitment to it as well. So I think that really helped too.
Yeah, I can see why your professors were excited and why the university was supportive, because I don't think most non-lawyers understand there isn't like motorsport law is not a class or something that you go to, but instead it's the intersection of so many practice areas that we do learn about or that we practice. If it's negotiations, if it's contracts, if it's IP, all of that is going to come into the motorsport world. So in so many ways, by attending that conference, you're getting some practical connections of the theoretical academic components that you're learning in law school. So I thought it was just fantastic that you both had come and got to hear about some of the real world elements of the law that we were discussing at that conference. Okay, so the other thing I wanted to kind of explore a little bit is that you are Canadians. And I always talk about the fact that I'm an American, and the way I experience Formula One is very different than, I would say, the traditional fan, which is mostly in Europe. But I would say, arguably, I'm meeting more and more people that are coming from a more global perspective. They may have been, like, I know recently I met somebody from Sri Lanka who has a very long commitment to Formula One and global motorsport. But I wanted to hear from you about what it's like to be a Canadian F1 fan. I mean, how would you describe the F1 community in Canada? And is it growing? Like, what's the vibe? Especially since you came out to Texas and Dakota, you have some ability to compare a little bit. I wondered what your insights were.
I definitely think the Canadian market is growing. I think there's so many moving parts to that, but I don't know, like, I think each year I'm definitely finding there are more and more people who I can talk to and connect with who are interested in the sport, and they were introduced to the sport either like Jennifer just because they grew up watching it and that was kind of like how it was for them, or there's the Netflix show, or these teams are making contracts with brands like very popular retailers and stuff. And so there's a lot more exposure. So I definitely see a lot more interest and more people are interested in it. As I'm more from the western side of Canada, I do feel like that is still a pretty untapped market. We have found a couple of places that will host viewing parties, but I think in Canada there is no F1 arcade, which is something Jennifer and I were able to go to viewing parties there twice while we were in London, and it was just such a different experience. And so, or the fact that we only have one track here, while we we have the land. And so yeah, I do see it growing, but I do think there's so much more that can be done here in Canada.
So before Jen probably has her insights, I want to unpack a couple of things you said, Arisha. F1 Arcade, what was that like especially going to it in London?
Very fun. Very fun. Definitely something, I mean, you have to book ahead of time because it shows they have such a big fan base there. And for those who haven't been, it's a bar, but it is F1 themed, and you go and it's a whole experience. You get to do like the simulation races. The drinks are very fun themes. They have screens all over where you can watch the race, and it's just a community. And watching the race and cheering with other fans who are like rooting for other teams, but there's still that collegiality there. It's such a fun experience, and definitely something that like I think people here would be very, very interested in.
And then the other question that I had was, you noted that you had one track in Canada. What is that like for you? Like, do you wish there were more? That you noted the fact that there was more land.
I'm sure Jennifer's gonna have a lot more to say on that, but yeah, it's in Montreal. Montreal is definitely an older track in terms of F1 history, but Canada is quite large, as we've established, and so it's not easy to get there. I mean, COTA, for example, it was quicker and easier for us to get there than to travel across to Montreal, which I think a lot of people don't realize. And so, yes, it's in our home country, but it might not actually be the most accessible grid for a lot of people here.
Okay, that's fascinating. I want to hear from Jen what your thoughts are, because clearly you have an opinion.
Yes. I agree completely with what Arisha said. I think in terms of the Montreal track, it's inaccessible for so many people in the country. It's also very expensive to fly and travel within Canada, which I think outside of North America, most people may not know. So I think if you're located on the western side of our country, it's far more unlikely that you're going to spend upwards to $1,000, for instance, for a round trip flight to Montreal. I think a lot of times the people going to those races are either Europeans, or it happens to be people either from Quebec or Southern Ontario, which is the neighboring province. And so even though I'm from Southern Ontario, I've never been, just because, again, it's very expensive, accommodation's expensive, and it is cheaper for me to go sometimes to Italy, for instance, to go watch a race because the flights are cheaper and accommodations cheaper in comparison. And so that's just something to take into account too with the Canadian fans. It is a little bit more challenging to get out to races. And then, yes, the one track is unfortunate. It's a shame we don't have more. As Arisha mentioned, we have so much land, and so it would be nice if Formula One would expand into Canada a bit more. I think there's demand for it. I would reckon that in the next 10, 20 years, there will be even more.
Where would you like to see them put one in?
I think if we're looking at land, Saskatchewan or Manitoba makes the most sense. But in terms of where there is demand for it, where there's population growth, you would probably want to do it in British Columbia or Alberta. I don't know where because we have the mountains, and so I'm not sure where you would put it. And of course, you need to take into account that the land is Indigenous land. So you would have to, that goes back to the legal aspect too, is, how many people are you having to discuss with and different entities and everyone in order to make these things happen. But it would be nice to see if, ethically possible. Yeah.
That's a very interesting. I don't think most of us outside of Canada would have considered any of these elements. I wonder also, when it comes to these places that you just listed, would this help in any desires in those communities for increased tourism? Do they have that hope that more people will come to their area, or would the local communities be like, oh gosh, kind of like it, we're off and nobody knows that we're here?
I think it might be an oh gosh situation.
Okay.
I think most of those places already have so much tourism because of the mountains, especially in Alberta. You have Banff and Jasper National Park. I don't think you could put a track anywhere near the mountains or that level of nature. Same with in British Columbia. So then it's a question of where else would you put it? You run into the same issue up north in the territories. And I imagine they don't want an influx of tourism. We already get so much of it. So again, that's something you need to take into account. What are the communities going to say? Are they going to be happy with it? Are they not? I'm not sure. You were from those
mountain. Well, I think Jennifer hit it right. I mean, I think it depends. Places like Montreal are used to tourism to an extent anyway. Beautiful city if you've never been. And so I think they see tourists anyway. Calgary, where I'm from, we're used to tourists, thanks to the Stampede, this event we have in the summer, or it's just a hub for people who want to come see Banff National Park or Jasper National Park. That being said, I think one of the key factors, as exciting as it is for say, add more tracks to Canada, is also the issue of accessibility. Like we did say, that is something that would need to be taken into account of. We may have the space, but if you're doing it up north in a province, how many flights are actually going there? Do they even have the infrastructure to host these events? Because they are large. They are very, very large events. And so lots and lots of moving parts to consider, which is why, I think we said it 10 to 20 years maybe, but I don't think I foresee it happening within the next 5 years or anything like that.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking from a race promoter's perspective, they do have to consider all that you just noted. But then your country has actually hosted the Olympics multiple times. So there is a community of people who know how to put on a good international event. And this is that. It's just over 4 days versus multiple weeks. So I could see it's just an interesting idea if we were to recalibrate the North American races somehow to include an additional one. Do you think that the Montreal race should continue as it is? Because a few years ago, there was that big infrastructure issue of people being told to leave when actually the race was still going. It was because I think if it was the weather, there was a lot of miscommunication. Do you think that there's continued need for upgrading that race, or would it be better to redirect resources?
That's a great question. I would say keep the race. I think historically, you want a race like that on the grid. You don't want to get rid of all the older tracks. So I would keep it. It is located, to my knowledge, on an island. And so I think that is where a lot of the transportation issues come into play. But we will see. They have changed when it is on the grid. We've moved it up into end of May, I believe, which will be interesting given that Montreal sometimes still gets snow at that time of year. So who knows? Maybe Formula One will be running a Pirelli snow tire. uh, so I say keep it for sure. I'd love to get out there at some point and experience it, and just the historicness of it, I think would be phenomenal.
Yeah, I think it's tough to comment on it because we've never been, but I also think the points you're bringing up in terms of logistics and organization, I don't think that's unique to just the Montreal track. I think you've been to a race, we've been to a couple of races, and I think each race definitely has like some upgrading that can be done or more work towards kind of the organization and logistics behind it.
That's great. Well, you perfectly segued into the next section of questions I wanted to ask you. And maybe we'll go with you first, Arisha, and then Jen, you could add in because she's the newer fan to the sport. I feel like this is a good question for her. Walk us through what it was like attending your first Grand Prix. Like, what surprised you the most?
The most? Okay, the sheer level of exhaustion that comes with attending a full Grand Prix weekend, I think is so understated. I have been to big festival events before. I've done back-to-back-to-back events, but I think especially when it's your first race, there's so much to take in. There's weather to consider. You're like, if you're like us, you're traveling in, you're catching flights and renting cars or all the logistics behind transportation. I didn't realize how early you are at the tracks and that you're just there all day because, well, especially like at COTA, there's just so much to do and experience all day. And I think for me, it was I didn't want to just see F1. I wanted to see the other races they have going on there as well. But definitely did not expect the level of exhaustion that came with attending the first Grand Prix and like the overstimulation and but still like a very, very, very exciting time while you're going through it. It just doesn't hit you till later.
I agree completely. I think that was my experience as well with Barcelona. It was fascinating to see the level of energy, even when you get to the track at 7, 8 a.m., whatever it might be. It is a full day event. You are there from the start to the very end. And of course, people do the tracks differently. You may not be there for practice or you may not be there for qualifying, but for me, I like to do all three. I like to be there from start to finish. So you are very exhausted. And I don't think that's talked about enough. You see the glamorization on social media. If you go look at my social media, it is, you're excited. It's all the good posts. You couldn't tell we were tired, but it is a good tired. And so I always encourage it. I'm happy to be there and exhausted for sure than at home and well rested.
Yeah, I mean, what you just said is, I think, the biggest distinction between watching a broadcast and being there live. We have the comfort of our couches, turn it on, turn it off, do the rest of our day. Those of you that are going to show up at the race, or those of us, I guess I can say that too, it's an intentional, your whole life has now stopped so you could enjoy, experience, be impacted by this race. Do you feel that there were major differences between the different races that you attended? Like, for example, comparing COTA to Monza, and then for you, Jen, even adding in Barcelona?
Well, one thing I think we talked about earlier on was that we pick tracks based off of where we haven't traveled to. And I think one logistical difference Jennifer and I did this time was we had planned to see Austin and explore around after COTA, which wasn't as successful as we had hoped it would be. Whereas when we had gone to Monza, we had just kind of booked our trip to Italy in a way of like, okay, well, there's like Como and all these other things we want to do. We better get that done before the race because we need to allow a day or so of kind of like rest and recovery before heading on to the next thing we were planning. And that made such a big difference, I think, as well.
Yeah, I agree completely. And in terms of differences, I think you do see, we were actually discussing this before, you do see the differences from Barcelona and Monza versus COTA in the sense of, I think COTA, you can feel that it's newer. There is a different demographic of fans, I would even say. Whereas in Monza and Barcelona, you do feel more of that, I think, old school Formula One experience. At least that's how I felt, when I compare it to when I was 5 watching it with my dad versus watching it now. I feel like Monza and Barcelona sort of gave me that energy I was getting when I was younger. from it, and so I do think it's a different even viewing experience.
Could you elaborate a little bit more about different demographic?
Yeah, I think there's more casual fans at COTA, which was very interesting because I don't think you get that as much in Europe, at least with the two races I have been to. It was honestly nice to see, like, there were casual fans that maybe were brought in because they're NASCAR fans and they wanted something to do that weekend. They're like, why don't we go watch practice or qualifying? Less so with the race. I think the race was predominantly people who are committed to Formula One. But I think it was nice to just see that it is almost accessible in that way. Whereas with Monza and Barcelona, you are getting that diehard fan experience, which is fun in its own regard. But at Monza, everyone's a Ferrari fan. Everyone loves Ferrari, even if you're cheering for another team. And so that in itself, that energy, you're not getting that same level at COTA, let's just say, because people are cheering for so many different teams. And so I think that's something to take into account when you're picking your race, if you can, is what kind of experience do you want? In Monza, you're getting that very Italy proud, very Ferrari proud, and it is very fun. It's very lively as well. Whereas in COTA, you do still have those diehard fans, but you're going to meet some really interesting people that maybe have different backgrounds. That's just something to take into account as well, like depending how you're going to pick your race.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, like Jennifer and I were saying before too, it was very interesting that in COTA, the crowd was predominantly North American based. I can't speak to how many were Canadians or from other states or wherever, but in Monza, it was definitely not just Italian fans. There were people from all over the European continent, different countries, and like you could tell they were generational fans. A lot of them had, brought their young children with them. It was a big like family experience. Whereas I feel like in COTA, it wasn't so as heavily family based as more so like individual interest or something you're doing with your friends. And like Jennifer was saying, like it was like an outing you did of like, oh, I'm in the area. Let's go see what practice is like, or let's go see, quali, or just spend a day at the grounds kind of thing.
And I think that is like a huge difference between the two is the generational fans. I think in Italy and in Spain, it is almost a part of that culture, right? Like I know my background's Portuguese, my parents were born over there, and Formula One is just a part of who they are almost. Like they're always watching it. And so I think that is different for some people in North America where that's not the case. Like you're either a newer fan, and if you did get brought up on it, then you would fall, I guess, into that generational fan category. But I think there are just so many new fans in North America. And so it plays a difference.
I think that's very astute. I wonder if when you look at the two races, COTA versus Monza, and the differences, do you think that they lean into that in the sense of COTA is attempting to create an experience that is accessible for this newer casual fan who hasn't maybe got that depth yet, right? They will have. The hope and expectation is that COTA and all these races in North America will continue and build that inside the North American community, that they may one day be what we see now in Monza, multi-generational, this diehard, it's part of the fabric of the community. Do you think that even something as simple as how things are laid out, how the type of activations that are happening, do you feel that it's tailored to those experiences?
Yeah, I think so. Absolutely. I think, well, like we were just saying, places like COTA, you can tell they're targeting the newer fans. And so there was a lot more, we were saying, fan experiences to keep them engaged between events. Whereas I think Monza had more of that traditional feel of like Jennifer was saying, like that old, like you're going and it was like almost like a picnic in the park. Like families just had their routine and knew what they were doing, and they didn't necessarily even have as many, I feel, like fan-based experiences or things to keep everyone engaged, or even nearly as many like stalls like I felt COTA had with, like I said, like popular retailers and stuff just selling like, the McLaren t-shirts or what have you. And so there was, I think, like you could tell more engagement with the fans in COTA in the sense of trying to keep them hooked into Formula One and keep them interested and to honestly keep coming to the races and engaging with the sport.
I think you see that a lot with the American Express. involvement in the races, although you see it at the European circuits. I would say it was significantly less than what I saw in COTA. And of course, that I'm sure that has to do with the fact that most North Americans may have an AMAX versus most Europeans probably don't. But you see it at the race, like COTA, every single corner, there was an American Express booth. They were giving out free items. There were activities, like we got to go up the tower for free in the morning and watch the Porsche Cup from up there. And so those experiences are phenomenal. And I think they draw in so many fans that maybe wouldn't necessarily experience the race in the same way without those, versus in Europe, or at least in Monza and Barcelona, there wasn't as many booths. You know, you get your product when you buy something with your Amex, but there wasn't like an experience with it. And so I think that does speak to the difference between the two experiences that we were saying.
Yeah, I think it ultimately comes down to establishing a new fan base versus already having an established fan base. And so I think the difference was definitely clear in both of our experiences.
Yeah, because I know for me, the American Express at COTA was a big deal. I was like, wow, that is everywhere. And I also wondered how much of it was because of American consumerism or North American consumerism. And that's the door that I think a lot of the sponsors want to make sure that they're taking advantage of, right? Because the sponsorship is ultimately they want to get eyes and eyeballs onto their products. They want to bring you into the door of their business. So is that part of the reason why you see a higher volume of activations than versus in a more established that came during the time, I mean, especially Monza, Ferrari, right? Like this is all happening during the initial years of when motorsport was really starting to be formalized, and it's just got that history. I wondered one other thing when talking about the distinctions between these two, and then I want to move on to a different topic. What did you think about the crowd size at these two, COTA versus Monza? Did it impact how you experienced the races, especially we talked about infrastructure at Montreal? Do you feel that the infrastructure at both of these places impacted how you experienced the race?
I think it's so interesting, the transportation piece, because we were just speaking heavily about this, how different each race has been. With Barcelona, for instance, my dad and I drove in, and so we had to deal with the parking. And even though you pre-purchase parking, no one was actually checking where you were parking. Versus in Italy, in Monza, although we didn't drive in, we took public transportation. My parents were also there and they drove in, and they were checking the parking. And I'm not sure how it was in COTA, because at COTA we actually did the F1 experience. So we were lucky enough to get driven in, which was phenomenal. If you can do that, that's the way to do it for sure, because it takes off the stress. Like, I actually do think the transportation aspect of it plays such a role in how you end up experiencing the race and what mood you're entering the track with. You know, when you're dealing with parking struggles, when you're unsure where to park, there's no clear direction, or you're taking public transit and it's taking you many of hours. It took Arisha and I think a solid 6 hours to get back from qualifying at Monza. Those types of things, like, although I think we're positive people, it affects your mood, right? It affects how you experience the sport, especially if it's on the front end when you're going in. I actually think Formula One should put more into how they organize that aspect of the race.
Yeah, and even not just transportation, but I think we were also talking about how, and it goes back to what we were saying earlier, that I felt like the stands were a lot more full during practice and like the Porsche Cup and everything in Monza compared to COTA. I also know this, again, just stems back to accessibility. My friend, so I'm slowly trying to get my social circle into Formula One as well. She was in Australia and they couldn't afford like to go to the races. And so I noticed, and I think a few people we talked to in COTA too had just come for practices because that's what they could afford. But practices are so different than the actual race and quali. And so just keeping in mind that I think Monza had a lot more people each and every day, whereas I think COTA was dealing with significantly more people on the weekends, which also I think stems to like the work cultures and differences there as well, and what people, like a lot of people can't take that Thursday or Friday off to go to the track, whereas I think in Europe the timings just were working out, that a lot of families and stuff were able to do that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Those are great thoughts. So let me move on to some of more the observation of these races kind of as a whole and the more business side, the spectacle side of Formula One. Tell me, you had we've talked about this actually offline, which is part of the reason why we decided to have this conversation. Y'all had some astute observations about the spectacle of Formula One. What did you mean by that? Like the attending, is it about the racing versus the overall experience and entertainment? Did you see that kind of as the broad scale, or did you even see differences between the races themselves?
I think, at least with Monza, and we both have this observation, is everyone is truly there to watch Formula One. Like, there is no question about it. They are diehard fans. They are there to see those cars. And if all they can get out to is practice, then that is what they will do. But I think with COTA was a little bit different. Like, it did feel almost more casual, at least on practice and qualifying day. And that was different for us. Like, I think for us, it was because we're having to travel so far. We too are there to see those cars. Like, that is our predominant goal. But it was interesting that with COTA, it was almost like inactivity, right? Like, you weren't necessarily just there to watch that Formula One car drive by you at like a super high speed and the noise and everything. You're there to experience everything, whether it's the concerts, like they have concerts. I had no idea, or the different events. Like, that's very different than what you're experiencing at Monza or at Barcelona, where everyone is just diehard fans. They want to see those cars, and that's what they want, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And I also think Formula One, I think our takeaway really was the experience is what you make of it. Going to a race versus watching it on screen is two very different experiences. And I think Jennifer and I have talked about this so much that it's like they both have their pros and cons. It really is like, what are you looking for? What your interests are? If you want it to be this big glamorized trip, I think places like COTA would fit the bill more. Versus if you're going just to cheer on your drivers, maybe some of more of the traditional tracks are geared towards that experience, and there's less pump and show, if you will. But also, I think, like, honestly, at both tracks, like we had our phones out trying to stream the race live too, because you're sitting at a certain section of the track, and so when you're watching on screen, you're watching everything. You can switch to driver's perspectives. You have the map on. Like, it's more engaging in that way. But then you're also missing like the electric crowds and the screaming and the running, like rising up and cheering. And so I think it really does honestly depend on like what you're looking to get from the experience.
I concur with a lot of what you guys said, and especially just from going to COTA, I think that it is about what your intent of being there. Is it about experiencing it versus the more spectacle side of it? And I think you see the full scale of people coming for all those reasons. So I would hope that those who are contemplating going, hearing from you about what it was like, will give them a better idea of how to pick from the time investment, the resource investment of which one to go to, and especially the idea of, are you going to go just for the race, or are you going to add more things? I think it's very wise of what you said about doing it before the race versus after, because I agree, it is exhausting, and that's a good exhaustion. So you guys are clearly, by attending the Lawinsport conference, you're thinking about the legal side of the motorsport world. What legal issues or considerations jumped out at you, either in the moment while you're at the race or even afterwards, like thinking about the legal issues that are there when it comes to the sport? Obviously, inherent risk is there. Like, that's kind of like, we all know that one. Well, we three know that one. Any lawyers listening didn't know that. It's an inherently risky, dangerous sport. But did you pick up on any other things?
I think our main one was both the shipping of the parts of the car. Those cars need to be transported from one country to another. The laws to enter, let's say, the United States versus Italy are going to be different. And so you need to be taking that into account when you're transporting those vehicles. And then on top of that, what happens if those parts don't show up? Is the shipping company in trouble? What is the liability around that? And so we were just talking about how complex those contracts must be and how many contracts must be in place to even accomplish getting the vehicle and extra parts and tires to those locations. And then our secondary thought was also the immigration perspective. It's not just about getting those drivers into whatever country they need to be at to race. It's also, how are those engineers getting there? How's the staff? What visas do they need? If they have a different kind of passport, they need different visas depending what country they're entering into. And immigration is something that is constantly changing. And so what worked this year might not work next year, whether that's for the drivers or for the staff. Those things I feel like are not common topics that the regular person may think about. I think maybe the lawyers or law students in the crowd might be sitting there going, like, there's a lot of people here. How did everyone get here? Or how did the cars get here? Yeah, I don't think we were sharing that with the people around us. I think they would have thought we were nuts, but it is fascinating to think about.
Yeah, I mean, we were also thinking about event licensing, liquor license, capacity at these venues, liability insurance. So true when they say law school ruins you, because I don't think the average person's going to the track and thinking about this. But could you imagine if X, Y, and Z happen? Like, how are they going to handle this? And I think you said it earlier, Sabrina, that there are just so many areas of law that motorsport touches upon. I know we can think about like the traditional contract law, but like Jennifer said, there's immigration law, there's international laws and regulations about transporting the cars and parts. I mean, there's employment law. They're not unionized, these drivers. There's aspects of family law, and there's so many areas that motorsport law touches. It feels like motorsport law in and of itself is like an umbrella term almost.
I agree. I mean, we'll talk about that your brain is always wired now to see things. I think it was the first practice. I was sitting at the top of the grandstand and I felt like my seat was a little loose. And I looked down and I thought, who checked these and who knows the liability that if I or someone else fell through this I was at the top of the grandstand too. I think I was only one row away from the top. And I went, oh my, the liability issue that is sitting here. I thought that also because earlier in the year, I had gone to the Racing Attorney Conference, which I've told you both about.
Mm-hmm.
Any other attorneys who are interested in motorsport law definitely need to consider this. It's called TRAC, TRAC. And this past year, it was in Indianapolis, and we got all the attorneys who attended got to go and see the track during the lead up to the Indy 500. So we got a tour into a lot of the places, and they said that they specifically had a spot for the lawyers for the track to be seated. Like, who was like, because it was an all day thing, the lawyer was on site. And I thought, my word, yeah, nobody thinks that this is the stuff that we have to do. They think it's all glamorous, but they don't realize all the stuff that as a lawyer you're having to juggle, and your brain is consistently analyzing, and it is partially because of law school and how it changes our brains. And I think it's a good thing. The other thing I wanted to ask you was, did you think about from a business perspective, did anything stand out to you when it comes to sponsorship presence? We talked about a little bit about Amex, but did you think about things like safety and crowd control, fan engagement strategies? Did you notice differences between the two that you had both attended, or even the third that you attended, Jen, in Barcelona? I can't remember where that hit in relation to your law school experience. Were you already in law school by the time you went to Barcelona?
No, I don't think
Okay, so maybe you weren't thinking about that. Yeah, okay. Your brain hadn't gone through the rigorous boot camp of law school. Okay.
No, and now it is on all the time.
I think for me, in terms of security, I think one thing we both had noticed was in COTA, you definitely saw more people working there, and those informational centers and such. Whereas I think it was more like a free flow in Monza when you were in the fan zone, and people just were self-sufficient and doing kind of whatever they wanted to do, to be quite honest. Whereas in COTA, I think like you saw a lot more security and people kind of like ushering crowds away, or like honestly, like it's my track, especially like my first time at any race and Jennifer's first time at COTA. And so there was also like they were very aware of like helping everybody there and making sure, you know, things were flowing smoothly, especially because there were just more activities at COTA. I also think that this has to do with the fact that COTA has, I think, invited a lot more celebrity brand ambassadors, and which is also something to keep in mind. I mean, we had a celebrity sighting in COTA. Ooh, we saw Nina Dobrev in a restaurant we were at, and she's absolutely lovely, so kind. But I just think that wasn't even on our mind when we were in Monza of like, you know, there might be a celebrity doing some brand endorsement, or I think a lot of the American tracks have influencers, and I think that also plays a big part in the type of crowds that are coming to the tracks. But that was one difference I think we saw in terms of like security and crowd control between the tracks.
Okay, that is such an insight that I really hadn't thought about celebrities being in some places and not. I mean, I guess everyone thinks of the most glamorous being Monaco, but the fact that you didn't see them as much, and it sounds like it is a much more old school, family friendly at Monza. COTA is more for the newer casual fan, approachability, accessibility. And then I guess it even is attractive to the Europeans who want to go on holiday to the United States, have that very different experience of coming to COTA. So then let me switch gears and ask you a little bit about women in motorsport. You know, this is a big hot topic area, and even just in Formula One. As young women pursuing careers at the intersection of law and motorsport, both of these are two very male-dominated industries. And of course, I'm not putting you in the category of only motorsport. You're exploring that. So, and who knows if that's where you will eventually land. But you're an important demographic. And I just wonder what your experience has been like navigating these more traditionally male-dominated fields. Have you encountered any particular challenges or encountered any specifically encouraging supportive mentors in these networks? And I just wanted to kind of hear a little bit more about your experience.
On the mentor front, I mean, you've been fantastic, right? So thank
Well, I didn't say that. I didn't say that for you to say that for me. I don't think of myself as a mentor, but thank you so much.
No, of course. You've been such a help with navigating this area. And I actually will say on a professional front, I think we've only had positive experiences. You know, last year, pre going to the conference, I was looking at hosting a sports law panel, not just motorsport, all law at our law school. And I reached out to various lawyers that worked for the teams. And I really didn't expect to hear back, but every single one of them reached back out. Most of them were happy to attend. The only reason the others weren't is because they couldn't with their schedule. A lot of them set up Zoom calls with me, and they spoke with me about, you know, what would be discussed and they wanted to be a part of the process. I've actually had such a positive experience with the lawyers in this field, which is great. And although that event didn't end up panning out due to logistics, I'm still in contact with them. And then I got to see them all at the conference, which of course helped, you know, meeting in person is better than virtually. I think in terms of the legal field, at least from what I've experienced so far, it has been a very positive one. I think when it comes to watching the sport as a fan, it is a different experience. I think, especially with the rise of Drive to Survive, I think there is a perception that women are interested in the sport because of the drivers and not because of the sport itself. And so I do, and Arisha, both of us, we do get the occasional, oh, like you're interested because of X, Y, or Z driver, and we must not know about the sport. And so it was interesting to see the difference between, you know, navigating it as a legal professional versus navigating it as a fan.
Yeah, and I think you said that perfectly. And I think to build upon that, when we were at the conference, there was, after all the panels, that the networking bit. And first off, the Women in Sport panel was phenomenal. All the speakers were amazing and so and captivating. But I think there was just such a sense of community among the women at the networking event. I mean, everyone was just sharing their LinkedIn information and asking how we could just keep building each other up and keeping each other connected within motorsport law. And so that was such a positive experience. And like Jennifer said, that is where we met you, and we got great and are getting great mentorship from you as well, Sabrina. But even I think we had some hesitation being the only, well, at that time we didn't know you were going to be there, but for us, the only Canadians, like North American people at this conference. And if anything, people were just so welcoming, and the women especially, and they were just so excited to have us there, and they were asking us just as like many questions as we were asking them. And so that was a very supportive environment. And then, yeah, back to what you were saying, Jennifer, about like the Netflix show. Uh, I'm the newer fan. And so, yeah, this is something we have witnessed a lot, is that I'll tell them I started with the Vegas race. I've only been watching for a couple of years. But the very first question I will always get asked is, did you start it because of the show? I had never seen the show, actually. So to me, it's always like, well, no. And now I have to go an extra step to justify why. Because, yeah, they'll be like, oh, it's probably because you find this driver attractive, or you've seen this person like on Instagram or whatever. And I was like, I'm actually really not on the socials much either. So it truly was just Jennifer introduced me to it. I watched my first race and I was hooked on. Whereas I think, and I think you feel like have seen the same thing, is our male counterparts, the newer like fans, they are not asked if it's because Drive to Survive, or even if they're open about it, there is no follow-up or judgmental question. With that, they're like, oh yeah, well, of course, like, what a great show. Like, you just get to see the drivers, and suddenly everything that maybe a woman might be interested in the show doesn't apply to the men. And so that I have seen, and it's been like, well, like other sports, obviously it's not unique to motorsport. It's like we have to work the extra step to kind of prove like we can be fans. I can understand terminology. I may be a girl, but I can get cars to an extent. and I wasn't, like, not to say Netflix hasn't done a great job, or all the marketing teams, like we were saying on social media, especially what they called Racing Bulls this year, they keep up with the trends and they have a lot of engaging content with their drivers. Not to say that is any way to get like a shameful way or whatever to get started with this sport, but I do feel like the presumption is like, oh, a woman can only be into this sport because she's attracted to a driver because it was on TikTok or what have you. So that's definitely something we've noticed.
Yeah, I do think it's interesting that the distinction of the general fan versus the professionals in the sport. I think the professionals understand that it doesn't really matter if you're a guy or a girl. You're coming in here because you want to make a career of this. You have some personal, professional aptitude, interest that you would take, and you would do that if you were coming here, or if you were going into healthcare law, or if you're going into contracts and negotiations in general. For some Fortune 500, we wouldn't question like that person. We would just be looking at their competence in this. And so I feel like there's a little bit more of an equity aspect to it. Like, you're just looking to see, are they competent to do the sport or to do the business. It is interesting that in the more general fan base, you do feel as a woman you have to justify why, or even just comments that'll be made could, if you are super sensitive, can be really frustrating. I know Dick says it all the time. He's like, you're a fangirl for Charles. I'm like, yes. But he also knows I'm a fangirl for all of the racers because I just respect all of them. And he says it in jest. And I think some people might take it offensively. I don't take it offensively. Like, I think he's a great person, like a great human being that is inspired. I have been inspired by him and his story and his drive, and like so many parallels to his life that has made me only want to cheer him on. But I'm going to cheer on all of them. And I also say, like, all of them have unique stories, which I think the sport has realized it's of great value to highlight that versus keep it quiet. And maybe that is why you've attracted a new demographic but that's not what's going to keep them sustaining. If you sit there and think that that's like, we're only here for the soap opera drama side of it as women, you are marginalizing a large base that you have worked really hard to bring in, and they're not going to stay here if that's all you're catering towards them. I think that, again, the sport understands that. The industry understands. I think we even had some conversations at the Law and Sport Conference about this very topic, about how if that was all that you put the female demographic into that category, you're missing out quite a bit. I do think that the more traditional male fan, depending on his understanding of women in sports, probably flavors the perception of why we come into the sport. I think it's interesting because as I was watching the two of you, I realized you mirror in many ways my entry into the sport, because Jennifer, you're my best friend, Rachel, John's daughter, who invited me into the sport. We're just about 10, 15, well, probably 15. No, we've been friends for 20 years. So we're probably 20 years ahead of you in this. And then I always feel like I have to say, but I don't have all of this knowledge because I didn't grow up around the sport. But she's similar to you, Jennifer, of wanting to share the sport with other people. So many principles of life and like memories for her come from racing. And I think, Arisha, when you hear that from your friend, someone you so respect and love dearly, you're like, well, yeah, I'll give this thing a twirl and see if I like it. And then you watch it and you're like, oh, this is amazing. And then you start to just unpack that onion and you realize there's so much depth. And I think probably for intellectual people, especially lawyers, when we start to see the sport, you start to see so many other pieces that just are exciting. I'm not saying that non-intellectuals can't enjoy it too. Like you can enjoy it too. Like that sounded really kind of elitist, and that wasn't my intent at all. But I imagine right now half of our audience is laughing hysterically. But I think that it's great that you both are of a different generation and are willing to say, I understand that this is where some people's misperceptions are, but I'm not going to let it hinder me from enjoying the sport. One, two, seeing how this could ever intersect with my own professional dreams and aspirations, but not being turned off, because I think it would do a disservice to both as a fellow fan and also a legal professional to not have you sitting at the proverbial table or couch, whatever it is that we're sitting at. Let me ask you this. Where do you see is the most opportunity for women in the motorsport industry? Like, is it as drivers, engineers, team personnel, legal professionals like us, or business executives?
That's such a great question. We actually were very excited to talk about this because we genuinely believe in all those areas. I really think where there's a woman, there's a way. We're determined, we're resilient, we're hard workers. And those doors that, may have seemed closed or still, to many seem closed, they aren't. We deserve to be in there, whether it is as a legal professional, as an engineer, whatever it might be. Women deserve to be in those spots because we are capable and we are competent and we are good at our jobs. And I think more and more that the world is seeing that, the profession is seeing that. And so I think in 5, 10, 15 years, whatever it might be, we are going to see more women in motorsport in general, regardless of what area that might be in.
Yeah, and I think, we can look at law schools right now. You will see in our classes always more women than men in the classes. And I think that is really indicative of where industries are going. And like Jen said, Jennifer said, you see it in engineering, in the team personnel, in the strategists. There is just so much growth. And I know we were talking about it's been really cool in the last few years, what you've seen, like the progress in F1. If you look at the F1 Academy, it's only been around for a couple of years, and they started off with, and I could be very wrong, but they started off with, I think, 15 drivers, and only 5 of the teams were supporting the academy. And last year, I think they were up to 18 drivers, and all 10 teams were supporting the drivers in their livery. And so the growth is there. And so I think personally, we're so excited to see in the next 10, 15 years, like how just the face of F1 is going to evolve and develop and change.
Well, I love that you brought up the F1 Academy aspect because I don't know that we have talked about this very much, but do you have opinions on driver development? Where does this issue kind of land for you? Is that something you haven't really explored or you've explored quite a bit?
I think, like a lot of areas, there's still a long ways to go, but strides are being made, and not just in driver development. I think conversations like we're having today are so important. That woman in law panel we went to, that was amazing. I mean, we're seeing teams like Haas, they had the first full-time woman race engineer in F1. Mercedes has a female development driver working, so I really do think like we're seeing it. It's just, like everything else, it is taking time.
I agree. I think we're making the right strides, but I also think there's always room for improvement. I think you need to put the financial aid into that area as well. You need to grow it. I'd love to see more development for those women drivers that their male counterparts are getting. I think that's the only way that we can, progress as much as we'd like to.
What about even if we pulled out the scope to just drivers in general, male or female? What do you have thoughts about just general driver development?
We actually were talking about this, how different it is in Europe versus in North America. And when we were living over in France, there's events almost every weekend. Like we had a classmate who was one of the drivers. He would race on the weekends. And so you see just how ingrained it is and how accessible it is. And that I don't believe is the case in North America. I think it's growing, yes, but I think the development here is very different. Not to say that we don't have kids that are growing up wanting to be Formula One drivers or NASCAR drivers. I think we do, but I think getting the Formula One is very difficult, especially when you're not in Europe, and you need to have the means for that. You need to be able to. We see with Lance Stroll, he's very fortunate that he comes from a wealthy family, and so those opportunities are available. You can go to Europe and train, but the average Canadian can't send their child to Italy to go train unless they, have family there that's willing to take on that child, right? Yeah, your work, your life, everything is here. And so in terms of development, it's so interesting to see just the difference between the continents and what is available. And I think Formula One is just such an expensive sport. Motorsport in general is expensive. When it comes to the development of drivers, I don't think necessarily everyone that has the talent to go far is always the individual being developed and going far, unfortunately.
Arisha, you're the one newer to the sport. Do you think that is as obvious to the more newer fans who, especially that are North Americans, Canadians or Americans, who say, why isn't there an American or why isn't there a Canadian on the grid? Do you think that they see the challenge it is for a North American to get onto the grid?
Initially, honestly, I think because I had heard of Formula One before actually ever having watched a race, so I always kind of associated it as a European sport. So to me, it wasn't really that surprising. But as I've spent more time watching races and learning about the sport, it really, and I think doing these conferences, going to the races, the tracks, it's becoming more and more like, well, we have interest here, and we have people that I think like if they had the opportunity would maybe put their children in karting, and if they actually saw that there could be some future to have their children participate in sport. But I think that wasn't my initial thought and reaction. I think it really came from as I got more into it, I was like, wait, like, we always talk about representation and what that looks like. And so on that level, it really was like, oh yeah, like, I guess they all just kind of live on the same continent for the most part. And, I think initially there was one American driver, and I think it was easy to see like, oh, like, he's the only one who has to travel quite a ways to go home for the summer. And like, what are the disadvantages of that? What's he missing out on? And so those thoughts did start to come. And I think as I progress with my time and interest in the sport, like it does become more so, how do we make that more accessible, and how can we integrate? Because I'm sure there's talent all around the world. It's just not easy to find and or develop right now.
Yeah, I agree. I think that one of the things that you just said, most people wouldn't get, especially as you get older, is what is his break like? Because you were navigating going away from home to pursue your professional development. That's something you have to navigate, is like, how do I stay connected with my family and friends? Where that's very similar to what an F1 driver is, approximately your age right now. And that's only a few days in an intense profession that he's doing, similar again to law school in that sense. Yes, people who are not lawyers may not understand this, but it's true. Mentally, you are going through your paces when you're in law school. So I say that the downtime is just as important as the time that you're on. And if you're away from home and you're not doing your best, it all compounds to that mental impact, which then we know will affect their actual performance. And if you don't have that support system, you guys, you're nodding your heads. Our audience can't see this, but you're nodding your head because it's the reality of an intense profession and when you're trying to achieve your dreams. So I'm really glad that you brought that up. I'm glad that you both have brought these insights. I want to be mindful of your time. Ask you like 2 questions, which is, 1, what races are on your bucket list to attend? And part B to that's really is, what's drawing you to those particular circuits or tracks? And then finally, any other thoughts or insights you'd like to share with our audience kind of as the closing. So I'll let you decide between the two of you who wants to take it, but both of you have to answer those questions. And you don't have to say the same thing on your bucket list.
Well, it's hilarious because it's the exact same. And so you say one of them and I'll say the other.
Yeah, okay. Great. I think Singapore is a huge one. That is actually a track we have, I think, had on our vision board for years. I think it's because it's a night race. It's on the streets. It's just so different from what we've done. I've also been to Singapore, so I would love to go back. The culture there and just the experience, I can only imagine, be so different from Europe and North America. So I know that's why Singapore plays a big role. It kind of checks the travel and a very different style of race we get to see.
And our second race would be Montreal. I think it's crazy. We're both so Canada proud and we have not been to the Montreal race. And so I'd like to see us go in the next, hopefully 5 years, ideally this year, but we will see. Again, just because it is in our home country, I would love to see how it compares to COTA because it's in North America. But then at the same time, I think Montreal has such a European feel and everyone that goes says this. And so it'd be interesting to see what bucket Montreal falls into. Ideally, we will have the answer to that question soon. But yeah, those are 2.
Yeah.
And then other insights.
Okay, well, as a newer fan, I think for me, we talked about the challenges that come with being a new fan, but I think also if you have an opportunity to engage in the sport in any which way, I would highly, highly encourage it. You may hate it, and that's fine, but I just do think it's one of those, you just won't know till you try. I would definitely recommend, especially if you're a female trying to get into the sport, it doesn't matter that people are trying to question your motives behind it. I think this is just like a fantastic sport to get into. And there's just so many, professionally or even just like as a spectator of the sport, there's just so much that can be done within it. And you can engage in so many levels and as much as you want to or don't want to. And so I think do it. And while I said it was completely exhausting, like we said, going to a race, I think it's an experience that if you ever have the opportunity to take, hopefully, you've learned that it's probably for trying to incorporate travel in there. Do it before the race because there is a lot of physical and mental exhaustion from attending a Grand Prix, whether you're just going for quali or just a race or the whole weekend. Like, there's just a lot that comes with it.
Okay, so I'm going to give you guys an assignment.
Okay.
When you go to your next races, we're going to need you to follow the suit of some of our other listeners who give us a recording or a report from what the experience was like. Pretty close to like they'll record while they're on site. And then we'll have to have you back on to talk about those experiences. I'm not really giving you guys a choice. I'm just saying that this is the assignment. You said earlier I was your mentor, which I'm so honored you even think that, but this is your mentor's assignment to you selfishly, because I want to hear what your insights are. The 2 races that you've brought up are fantastic. Like with everything that you both do, it's thoughtful. it's purposeful and also fun. That's one of the things that have been so endearing about the two of you, is that it's clear that you want to make the most of what you do with your time. You're very intentional. I love that you're kind of like conjoined twins. It's so fun to watch that you have a true friendship and professional respect for each other. And that's not always something you see. And so maybe that's why I gravitated towards the two of you that day. And we were North Americans. I was like you, going to the conference thinking I'm going to be the only North American. I thought I was going to be the only American, which I think I was. It's been a delight getting to know you. I hope the audience feels the same way of listening to this conversation. And I just only want the best for the two of you as you continue to progress in your professional as well as your fan experience in Formula One. And so all the best. And I hope that we will have another conversation.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. And I hope, we were able to kind of provide some more insight into what it's like to be going to these races and how we found it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And the assignment's great. That gives us even more reason to push to go to Montreal this year. I'm hoping I can wear a Ferrari toque with the pom-pom, and since it'll be cold enough, I think. But yes, so thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Oh, you're so welcome. I see the audience will know. This is why I just have fallen in love with the two of you. You're just so easy to get along with and work with. And they don't know this, but I meant to say this earlier. Jen is wearing a Ferrari jacket, and I can see the emblem. I mean, you're Ferrari proud, and that's fantastic. Well, on that note, ladies, thanks so much for your time, and I look forward to our next conversation. Okay, friends, what did you think of this conversation? We'd love to hear from you. What questions are you wrestling with? What should we dive into next? Send them to Sabrina at 2guysagirlandf1.com. We read every single one, and frankly, your questions are usually more interesting than what we'd come up with on our own. And with that, let me say, this ends our conversation. But we'll keep talking, and you can keep listening in, because we're just two guys, a girl, and F1. For John, Dick, and me, Sabrina, thanks for listening.